Chapter 101, Reunion and Choice. Hermione was on the verge of breaking down. They had fought through countless obstacles and layers of blockade to get back to Hogwarts, only to stumble into what felt like a meticulously woven snare. The moment they stepped inside, a piercing alarm blared. Footsteps and shouted orders echoed from every corridor. "Split up!" Harry croaked, trying to draw their pursuers away. Two pale figures flashed from behind a tapestry and dragged the three of them into shadow. "This way! Quick!" A familiar, urgent female voice hissed. "Ginny?" Ron cried, equal parts surprised and relieved. "Luna?" There was no time for greetings. Ginny and Luna hauled them into a narrow, dark secret passage, twisting and turning until the noise above faded behind them. The air tasted of dust and damp stone. "How did you know we were back?" Harry asked between breaths. "Slughorn sent word. There was going to be a big sweep tonight. He warned you might return. It's a trap," Ginny said rapidly. "Someone definitely saw you. We have to get out of the main castle now." "Where to?" Hermione asked, anxious. "The passage to the Shrieking Shack," Luna replied in her airy, otherworldly tone. "It's safer. Blibbering humdingers don't much like the smell." They hurried on, the sound of chaotic footsteps, curses, and strange plant hisses filtering down from above. Hogwarts had become a battlefield. At last, they reached the entrance to the Homping Willow Passage and skidded to a halt, but it wasn't empty. Neville Longbottom had another boy pinned, a tall Slytherin, Vincent Crabbe. Neville, bloodied and bruised, had Crabbe locked in a desperate grip that kept him from reaching the knot that would halt the Homping Willow's movements. "Neville!" Harry lunged forward. A silent spell struck Crabbe between the shoulders. He crumpled soundlessly. Jiang Wu stepped from another branching corridor, wand still smoking faintly. She looked tired, but her eyes were steady. "Jiang Wu," Hermione breathed, relieved. She inclined her head. "No time to explain. The search party will find this place soon. We must go through the passage now. Neville, are you all right?" Neville wiped blood from his lip and shook his head. "I'm fine. Let's move." Harry took in the scene. The steadier, more determined Neville, Ginny set and decisive, Luna oddly perceptive, and Jiang Wu, enigmatic but ever-present in their hour of need. A fierce, complicated warmth swelled in him. Hogwarts hadn't surrendered. His friends were still fighting. They reached for the knot to enter the passage when a cool, silky voice slithered from the corridor behind them. "What a touching reunion!" Everyone froze, wands leveling instantly in the dim light. Severus Snape glided out of the shadows, his black robes hanging motionless as if in a windless room. His face was unreadable. His dark eyes swept over them like a cold pool and settled on Harry. "It seems, Mr. Potter, you have chosen to walk right into the trap," Snape said without change of tone. "And your accomplices, these poor, naive school rebels." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. With Snape blocking the way forward and the search parties closing behind them, the group was trapped between two forces. Harry stepped instinctively in front of Hermione and Ron, green eyes flashing. "Snape, silence, Potter." Snape cut him off, wand raised, aimed. "Your foolish defiance ends here. Put down your wands and come with me, now." He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung in the air. Ginny and Neville kept their wands up, though both hands trembled. Luna's eyes were wide, as if she perceived something around Snape that others couldn't. Jiang Wu shifted a half step, subtly placing herself to block the passage entrance, one hand hidden behind her back as if gripping something. The moment of choice had come. Surrender or fight to the end. And Snape, ever the inscrutable figure, remained as ambiguous as ever, enemy or reluctant ally. His true intentions were still shrouded in shadow. The wand standoff stretched tight as a wire in the dim corridor. Snape stood like a black statue of judgment, blocking the only way out. Harry could hear his own heart thudding, and from somewhere down the hall, the high, frenzied roars and pounding footsteps of the Carrow siblings growing closer. Despair crept over him like ice water. They had failed. Not only were they captured, they had dragged the friends still fighting in the castle into danger with them. Harry was on the point of lowering his wand in surrender when Snape did something that froze everyone. The tip of his wand twitched, just a hair, and jerked to point at the wall behind them. Then, in that clipped, cold voice of his, but with a strange, almost mechanical cadence, he said, "It seems I need to give you a profound lesson. especially you, Potter, for your inflated self-importance. A white-red flare shot from his wand, and it struck a suit of armor mounted on the wall. The armor detonated with a violent crash, showering metal fragments and choking the corridor with smoke and debris. Over the blast, so brief Harry almost missed it, Snape's voice came again, only a whisper this time, urgent and sharp. Go. Jiang Wu reacted first. She slammed her hand against the knot in the trunk of the humping willow. The hidden passage yawned open. She shoved the dazed Harry, Ron, and Hermione inside without hesitation. Neville, Ginny, Luna, go, she barked. Neville, Ginny, and Luna understood instantly. Shock and confusion were swallowed by instinct, and they scrambled through the passage. Jiang Wu was the last to move. As she reached the entrance, she looked back. The smoke had thinned and revealed Snape, his back to them, at the far end of the corridor. He was moving his wand in a whirlwind of gestures, sending curses careening into the stone, his voice loud and mocking. Trying to run? Not so easy. Bones to dust, Crucio. He looked like a man battling invisible foes. Spells slammed into the walls and sent stone flying. His performance ferocious and convincing. It covered the noise of the passage slamming shut and masked the approach of any searchers. When Jiang Wu's gaze met his, he turned his head for a heartbeat. Their eyes locked in the dust-swirled air. There was nothing in those dark, inscrutable eyes but a cold, almost nihilistic resolve. Then he turned away and resumed his one-man onslaught. Jiang Wu didn't hesitate again. She slid into the passage and sealed the knot with the back of her hand. Inside it was pitch black. Only the ragged breathing of those huddled there filled the narrow space. The thud and scrape of the humping willow's roots above them reached them faintly, shrouding everything beyond. Why did he? Ron's voice broke on the words, incredulous and raw. He was helping us, Hermione said, voice shaking. Shock and a dawning, painful understanding mixed in it. He always was. He had to do this, to make them believe. Harry slid down the damp earthen wall and leaned back, heartbeat pounding, mind a whirl of contradictions. Snape, the man he had loathed for years, had just risked everything with a performance of betrayal so absolute it could cost him his life. Why? Could he really be working for Dumbledore after all? Only now did Harry begin to grasp the terrible price Dumbledore had asked for and the darker sacrifices Snape must have made. To be a double agent was to walk a razor's edge. The pain and pressure Snape must have borne were beyond ordinary imagining. Today's act of treachery was likely only one small part of countless dark missions. Jiang Wu held out a tiny orb of light, soft and steady, so their faces appeared in a pale glow. She kept seeing Snape's cold, determined look, and for the first time felt something other than hatred toward him. The life he'd chosen was lonelier and darker than she had ever guessed. Dumbledore's chess game, she realized, was deeper and more intricate than anyone had understood. Snape, more than anyone, was the most dangerous and essential piece on that board. His betrayal had been the price of ultimate loyalty, and even now, as they escaped the corridor, their flight was only the beginning. Chapter 103, The Shrieking Shack's Proposal. The Shrieking Shack smelled of dust and old sorrow. Moonlight from a slit in the window fell in cold bands across warped floorboards. The only other light came from the faintly glowing orb suspended in Jiang Wu's palm. Harry, Ron, Hermione, Neville, Ginny, Luna, and Jiang Wu had finally reunited in the battered, history-steeped house. After a brief flush of relief, the truth of their task settled over them like another layer of dust. Hermione spoke quickly and precisely. They would find and destroy Voldemort's Horcruxes. What they knew so far, Slytherin's locket and Hufflepuff's cup were still unaccounted for, and the last Horcrux they'd finally confirmed was hidden somewhere within Hogwarts. Ravenclaw's diadem. The diadem, Neville frowned. We never even heard of it before. Maybe there are clues in Ravenclaw's common room, Ginny offered. Or, Luna's voice had that dreamy lift to it, the room of requirement. It gives people what they need. If someone wanted to hide something badly, maybe it would make the perfect place for it. Luna's offhand remark struck Harry and Hermione like lightning. The room of requirement, they said together. Harry's memory flashed to the time he'd hidden the Half-Blood Prince's textbook there. Years of forgotten, piled-up things, a labyrinth of other people's secrets. It was the ideal hiding place. But we can't go back now, Ron said. panic rising. Even if Snape helped us before, the castle will be locked down like an iron barrel. And even if we could get in, how would we find it in that enormous room? And we have to assume Voldemort has put powerful protections on the diadem, Hermione added, expression hardening. Jiangwu spoke quietly. Perhaps we don't have to go inside. She produced a tiny, shimmering pinch of mixed powdered spirit herbs, then set the breathing earth seed in her palm. If the diadem is in the room of requirement and is guarded by dark magic, she said slowly, and if I use the breathing earth seed, I might be able to sense and interfere with that dark energy from outside, like using a magnet to find iron. The suggestion was audacious and dangerous. The room of requirement's magic was ancient and savage to penetrate. Reaching through its barrier to pick out the signature of a single item was difficult and risked detection or violent backlash. Too dangerous, Hermione snapped. It's the only way right now, Harry said, steady. We need to know whether it's there and how strong its protection is before we can plan to destroy it. Jiangwu, how confident are you? Jiangwu paused, honest and raw. Less than 30%, and it will very likely alert Voldemort if I'm wrong. Silence settled. The risk was enormous. The payoff could be decisive. We'll cover for you, Neville said, suddenly steady. Ginny, Luna, watch the entrances. Harry, be ready. If she confirms it, we move fast. Ginny and Luna nodded. There was no room for hesitation. Jiangwu sat cross-legged and scattered the powdered herbs in a tight circle, drawing a simple spirit-gathering array. She cupped the breathing earth seed, closed her eyes, and let her spiritual senses spread outward like ripples across water. She sent that awareness up to the 8th floor of the castle, toward the smooth, hidden door that marked the room of requirement. Her consciousness passed through cold stone and tangled layers of magic, skimming over ward after ward before it brushed against the room's shifting barrier. She settled herself there like a feather on a great tide of power and began to sift through the torrent of memory and enchantment inside, thousands of objects' echoes mixed with the room's protean will. The work taxed her. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Her face went pale. Outside, Neville, Ginny, and Luna stood guard, wands gripped. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were poised for combat or retreat on a heartbeat. Jiangwu trembled. A muffled groan escaped her. A line of blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. "What's wrong?" Hermione demanded. She opened her eyes abruptly, shaken, but now with a look of fierce certainty. "It's inside," she breathed, voice thin. "I can feel it. A cold, greedy, arrogant, dark energy, very strong. It's buried deep in that room, and it's protected by an ugly, binding magic. I nearly got traced back by it." She had succeeded, but not without cost. Internal strain had left its mark. "We have to get it," Harry said, voice hard. "But how do we get past those protections?" Ron asked. The shabby door to the shack creaked and was pushed open from outside. Every wand was up in an instant. Every nerve was taut. A small, trembling head poked in. A house elf, wearing a clean tea towel, blinked huge, frightened eyes at them. There was fear in his gaze, but also resolve. "Dobby?" Harry breathed. "Mr. Harry Potter." Dobby squeaked, voice breaking with tears. "Dobby heard. Dobby knows the bad ones are trying to catch Harry Potter. Dobby has come to help. Dobby can apparate into the castle. Dobby knows many secret passages. Dobby can help you get that bad diadem." House elf magic was not bound by Hogwarts' anti-apparition wards. Dobby's arrival was like a sudden flare of hope in the dim room, proof that a covert entrance might still be possible. Plans rearranged themselves around that single possibility. With Dobby's help, a way into the besieged castle, into the room of requirement, now seemed, if still perilous, at least possible. The path to the final confrontation was now clear. Infiltrate Hogwarts, find Ravenclaw's diadem, and destroy it before Voldemort could stop them. The plan was drawn up in an atmosphere of taut nerves. Dobby would apparate Harry directly into the room of requirement to find the diadem, while the others split into two teams. Neville, Ginny, and Luna would make a large-scale disturbance around the castle to draw the Carrows and the search parties away. Jiangwu, Hermione, and Ron would wait by the 8th floor corridor to deal with any dark arts protections on the diadem. Jiangwu swallowed several healing pills and spirit recovery draughts she had refined herself, forcing herself to suppress the pain of her injuries. She handed Hermione and Ron a handful of special array stones, small, rune-etched stones imbued with powerful purification magic, and explained quickly how to activate them to counter dark enchantments. The operation began. Neville's group moved first. They returned to the grounds through the Humping Willow Passage and immediately split. Neville led a squad of DA members to assault the Slytherin common room entrance with their last reserves of screaming shrooms and enhanced stink bombs. Ginny and Luna, meanwhile, filled the Great Hall ceiling with huge glowing Potter-is-back fireworks and mimicked Peeves' voice shrieking through the corridors, "Death Eaters out of Hogwarts." The castle's uneasy calm shattered at once. Piercing alarms, students' screams, the Carrow's enraged shouts, and the patter of hurried footsteps blended into a single, chaotic roar. Most of the search party's attention was successfully diverted. At the shrieking shack, Dobby caught Harry's arm with his long, thin fingers. "Are you ready, Mr. Potter?" he asked, eyes bright with anxious purpose. "Ready, Dobby." "Thank you," Harry said, taking a steadying breath. With a crisp pop, they vanished. They reappeared with the familiar squeeze of apparition in a place Harry knew well. The Room of Requirement. The room that hid everything. It was more crowded and more chaotic than he remembered. Piles of objects rose around them, shelves sagged under old trunks and battered furniture, and dust motes swirled in the stale air. There was the sharp tang of old magic. Harry closed his eyes and tried to feel for the aura Jiang-Wu had described. Cold, arrogant, dark energy. His scar throbbed. Dobby's ears twitched. "Dobby feels it over there! Very, very bad!" he squeaked, pointing to a shadowed corner where toppled wardrobes and sealed crates had caved in on themselves. They picked their way through. The closer they got, the more Harry felt the pull against his mind, a sense of revulsion and possession that made his stomach turn. Finally, in an old moth-eaten chest with a half-open lid, they saw it, an exquisite, ancient circlet set with a large blue sapphire, emitting an eerie, alluring glow. It lay there as if it had been waiting. "That's it," Harry whispered. The diadem sent whispers into his mind, promises of wisdom, of power. A dark force tested the edges of his will. "Bad thing, evil thing," Dobby shrieked, but he reached out anyway. "Don't touch it." Harry grabbed his arm. "There's very strong dark arts on it." He raised his wand and tried to fetch the diadem with a levitation charm. The moment his magic touched the gem, the sapphire exploded in a blinding, icy blue light. The Room of Requirement shook violently. Rattling objects cascaded from the piles above, and a chorus of voices, cold, overlapping, furious, filled the air. "Thieves! You dare covet Ravenclaw's wisdom. Pay with your lives." Eerie blue flames erupted around the diadem, crawling outward like fiend fire. Wherever the fire licked, items froze and shattered into glittering shards. This was no ordinary blaze. It seared with dark curses and malice. "Run!" Harry shouted, slamming a protego up to shield them from falling debris and the lash of blue fire. Dobby clung to the back of his robes, trembling, trying to apparate them away. The flames spread with incredible speed and seemed to warp the air. Each of Dobby's attempts to apparate failed. Outside, Jiang-Wu, Hermione, and Ron heard the commotion and raced for the door, but a thick, crackling barrier of dark energy sealed the entrance. The Room of Requirement, the sanctuary that had helped so many students, had become a deadly trap alive with hellfire. Harry and Dobby were trapped inside. Chapter 105, Fire Room. The ghostly blue fiend fire lashed through the Room of Requirement like living, venomous snakes. It burned more than matter. It ate at souls, radiating a bitter cold and a smell of despair. The crack of objects freezing and shattering mixed with human screams, a savage symphony of destruction. Harry waved his wand until his arm ached. The barrier of his shield charm wavered under the onslaught, wood and spellwork creaking as it strained to hold. Dobby cowered behind him, shaking so hard his knees knocked together. He clung to Harry's robe and tried to apparate away, but the dark arts in the room slammed him back each time, as if an invisible wall held him rooted. "Aguamenti!" Harry yelled. The stream of water hissed and evaporated the instant it met the blue fire, only sending up a cloud of steam and apparently feeding the flames. "Confringo!" The blasting curse struck the fiend fire and died like a stone dropped into a whirlpool. Outside, Hermione and Ron battered at the door. Dark energy sealed it tight. Their magic left only shallow gouges on the metal. "What do we do?" Ron cried. "Jiang-Wu!" Jiang-Wu's face had gone ashen. The room's dark magic and the Fiendfire's malignant aura forced old injuries to flare. She understood this was no ordinary curse fire. It had been warped by a Horcrux's influence, made viler by Voldemort's hand. The breathing earth seed pulsed in her arms, a living heart that sent a frantic, conflicted chatter through her. It hungered to consume the dark energy and grow, but it recoiled from its overwhelming, domineering presence. There was no time to hesitate. Jiangwu ground her teeth, formed an intricate series of seals, and poured everything she had into the motion, her remaining spiritual power, and almost the entire life of the breathing earth seed. Hermione, Ron, press the erase stones to the door. Pour every spell you have into them, she ordered, her voice thin with the effort. Hermione and Ron obeyed without question, slamming the small erase stones, set with purifying charms, against the cold door and forcing their magic into them. Jiangwu slammed both palms to the floor, channeling the gathered life force outward. She could not simply snuff out a Horcrux-tainted fiendfire, but she could try something else. To trick the Room of Requirement's rules, to fold this patch of the room into a domain under her temporary control, to change the nature of the energy itself. A vast, gentle, remarkably tenacious emerald light rippled out from Jiangwu, spreading across the stone like water. It punched through the door and flooded into the Room of Requirement. Inside, the scene turned absurd and terrible at once. The blue fire and the green life force collided, braided, and shredded at one another. The fiendfire tried to freeze and devour the green light. The green light seeped into the flames and began to neutralize them. Uncursed plants in the room answered the life force. It was as if seeds that had weathered the Malfoy and dark arts years suddenly remembered how to grow. Vines and brittle shrubs shot up in a frenzy, forming fragile barricades that slowed the flames. The door's dark seal groaned under the pincer attack of the externally charged erase stones and the inward surge of life energy. Cracks spidered across it until finally a gap yawned open. "Now!" Hermione screamed. She and Ron threw the door wide. They staggered back at the sight. The Room of Requirement had become a battlefield where garden and hell met. Harry and Dobby crouched behind a makeshift barricade of thorny shoots and wrecked furniture, which the fiendfire hungrily licked at. A thick blue fire snake reared to bar their path. Dobby's eyes widened with a sudden, fierce decision. "Harry Potter, go!" he shrieked, throwing himself with every ounce of his small strength at Harry, shoving him toward the doorway where Ron and Hermione waited. The fire wrapped around Dobby in an instant. "No!" Harry screamed toward the air. At the same moment, a concentrated burst of emerald light slammed into the heart of the blaze and struck Dobby full on. Jiangwu, utterly spent, had forced out the last of the breathing earth seed's essence and hurled it as a shield. Green life met cursed blue. They detonated in a blinding, ear-splitting explosion. Dobby was thrown out like a ragged kite, blackened and motionless. He lay unconscious and charred, but beneath the soot there was a faint, stubborn sign of life. The last of the green light had held him, just barely. The blast threw Harry, Ron, and Hermione out of the doorway and along the 8th floor corridor. The Room of Requirement's door slammed shut behind them, sealing the still raging fiendfire and the dim, fading green light within. Charred streaks and smeared emerald residues marred the panel, a bruised record of the clash. Silence fell in the corridor like a physical thing. Harry crawled toward Dobby on his hands and knees, eyes blurred with tears. Hermione and Ron hauled themselves up, bruised and bloodied, stunned into frozen horror. Jiangwu sagged against the corridor wall. Her face was paper white. A steady trickle of blood stained the corner of her mouth. The breathing earth seed in her hands glowed faintly and threatened to go out like a lamp on its last wick. To save Dobby and to break through the Horcrux-tainted flames, she had nearly exhausted herself and cracked something at her core. They had the diadem. In the last instant of the explosion, the diadem had been flung free, and instinct made Harry snatch it from the air. But the victory was Pyrrhic. Dobby's condition hung between life and death. Jiangwu had been drained to ruin. Their position was now unmistakably exposed. From down the corridor came the sound of boots, fast, hard, and coming closer. The Caro siblings and a pack of snatchers were on their way. Chapter 106. Return of the Principal. Icy despair pressed in on Harry and the others like the stone walls of the 8th floor corridor. Dobby lay barely breathing on the cold flagstones, his charred, tiny body twitching. Jongwoo leaned against the wall, her face ashen, her breath shallow and flickering like a candle in a draught. Hermione and Ron struggled to their feet, wands held at both ends of the corridor, but their hands trembled. Their resistance felt meaningless against the advancing force. Harry clutched the icy diadem, which still pulsed with a malign allure. His scar burned with a pain so fierce it felt as if poison were pouring through the link into his head, the fury and triumph of Lord Voldemort flooding him. Heavy, measured footsteps approached from both ends of the corridor like a drumbeat of war. Amicus and Alecto Carrow's twisted, eager faces appeared at the edges of Harry's vision, and behind them a dark mass of searchers and fanatically loyal Slytherin students pressed forward. "Seize them, dead or alive!" Amicus roared, the tip of his wand flaring with a lethal green light. Then, at that crucial instant, an overwhelmingly brilliant light descended, gold and red, warm as the rising sun. It did not come from either end of the corridor. It pierced down from the dome of Hogwarts itself. The light fell like a tangible wall and cut Harry and his friends off from their enemies. The killing curses the Carrows hurled struck the luminous barrier and fizzled away like snow thrown onto a furnace. Everyone froze, even the searchers. The light drew together, condensing into a tall, venerable figure. He wore deep purple robes stitched with stars. His long silver hair and beard shone like moonlight, and behind half-moon spectacles, his usually twinkling eyes held not humor, but a thunderous majesty and inexhaustible power. Albus Dumbledore stood there, an immovable mountain of presence, his returned authority filling the corridor. The hand that had once been cursed and burned still bore scars, but beneath the golden-red glow, it looked revitalized. "It seems," Dumbledore's voice rang out calm and clear, reaching every corner of the passage, "that during my absence some have forgotten the rules of this school and the courtesy due to guests." "To Dumbledore?" Amicus's voice betrayed disbelief and fear. His wand nearly slipped from his fingers. Alecto went white and let out a strangled, "Dead?" Dumbledore raised an eyebrow, and the corner of his mouth twitched into a faint smile. "Indeed, I had a brief encounter with it," he said. "But it appears it thought Hogwarts' whack. Refreshments were not yet finished, and declined my company." His gaze swept the wounded Dobby and the exhausted Jongwoo, hardening. "To inflict such brutality on my students and guests, Amicus, Alecto, that is not how Hogwarts treats visitors." He lifted the Elder Wand. There was no spoken word, no dramatic flash, yet wands flew from the hands of the searchers and Slytherin students, as if yanked by invisible strings, and clattered into a neat pile at Dumbledore's feet. The Carrows were seized as if by great hands, slammed into the wall, and crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Absolute suppression, silent, wandless magic. With nothing more than a casual wave, Dumbledore disarmed and subdued the main culprits. The remaining students scattered, screaming and shoving one another backward as if they had seen a specter. Dumbledore ignored them. He moved quickly to Dobby, touching the house elf's chest with the tip of the Elder Wand. A soft golden-red light flowed into the charred little body and steadied the fading life. Then he stooped beside Jongwoo and tapped her forehead. A pure, soothing current of magic threaded through her injuries, calming her scrambled energies and returning a trace of color to her cheeks. "Madame Pomfrey will take good care of them," he said in his gentler voice. He looked at Harry and nodded. "Well done, Harry. You obtained the most crucial item." Harry's eyes filled with tears, words caught like stones in his throat. At last he managed. "Professor, you're back." "Yes, Harry, I am back." Dumbledore's look was deep. "And now it is time to end this long nightmare." He turned toward the Room of Requirement's scarred door, its surface blackened and streaked with emerald. He raised the Elder Wand again. "It is time for this room to return to its purpose." A pure white beam struck the door. The lingering dark magic and the marks of fiendfire melted and slid away like ice under the sun, leaving the wood smooth and whole. Dumbledore pushed the door open. Inside there was no chaotic horde, no inferno, only a simple, bright room warmed by gentle power. In its center stood a stone plinth, empty. "Place the diadem there, Harry," Dumbledore said softly. Harry took a breath, fought through the stabbing pain of his scar and the diadem's whispering, and walked forward. He set Ravenclaw's diadem on the stone, As it touched the plinth, Dumbledore lifted the Elder Wand, his face suddenly solemn beyond words. "Tom Riddle," he intoned, his voice carrying the weight of judgment, "your fragmented, defiled, false immortality ends here." The tip of the Elder Wand flared with a light so pure it seemed born of the sun's core. It engulfed the diadem. There was no explosion, no scream, only a searing, transforming brilliance. The diadem shuddered as if being purified. Its darkness and curses peeled away and rose like smoke, dissipating into nothing. The large blue gem dulled, then cracked and collapsed into ordinary dust. Pain like a tearing in Harry's scar was followed by a new, astonishing lightness, as if a filthy chain had been snapped. From somewhere far off came a shriek, inhuman, full of pain and rage, then silence. The second Horcrux, Ravenclaw's diadem, was destroyed. Dumbledore drew a breath that showed the effort the purification had cost him, but he met Harry's gaze with relief and hope. "The last one is in the castle, Harry," he said quietly. "Nagini, and Lord Voldemort himself is on his way. The final hour has come." The return of the headmaster, a brilliant beacon in the long night, had shifted the tide. The flame of hope flared anew, and the trumpet for the final battle sounded. The news of Dumbledore's return spread like the first warm breeze of spring, racing through every corner of Hogwarts. Where it passed, frost melted, fear loosened its grip, and hope was reborn. Students and teachers who had been hiding, trembling for so long, emerged with wands in hand, eyes alight with courage. Professor McGonagall immediately marshaled the staff, taking command, rounding up the search party members who had surrendered and isolating the defiant Slytherins. Madame Pomfrey, aided by a powerful restorative Dumbledore had brought, tended to the wounded. Dobby, though still unconscious, had been stabilized. After receiving nourishment from Dumbledore's pure magic and a short rest, Jiangwu regained some mobility. Her breathing earthseed remained dim and would need long care, but the light had returned to her eyes. "He's back! Professor Dumbledore is back! We're saved! Let's fight the Death Eaters!" Thunderous cheers rolled through the castle. Neville, Ginny, and Luna rallied the DA, meeting the teachers and organizing a makeshift defense. Fred and George arrived as if from nowhere, carting the contents of their joke shop and handing out their inventions as weapons. Hogwarts, that ancient stone fortress, seemed to awaken. Portraits leapt from frames, seizing weapons and volunteering as sentries and messengers. Suits of armor stepped down from their displays and fell into ranks. Staircases shifted of their own accord, funneling intruders into blind alleys. Dumbledore stood at the highest point of the entrance hall. Silver hair drifting, though there was no breeze. He said no long speech. His voice, calm and powerful, carried through the hall. "Hogwarts has been invaded. Friends and family are threatened. Now is the time to defend our home. Those who will fight, stay. Those who wish to leave may evacuate safely through the secret passages. The choice is yours." Almost no one chose to leave. Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and even many Slytherins remained, wands gripped tightly, faces set. Then the castle's protective magic shuddered. Violent fluctuations rippled through the wards. Figures swarmed the dark sky. The Death Eater army had arrived, led in person by Lord Voldemort. They blotted out the stars like a cloud of locusts, radiating a suffocating blackness. In the gloom, Voldemort's pale, snake-like face was visible, his eyes like burning coals of rage and killing intent. Nagini coiled at his feet, hissing and flicking her tongue. Bellatrix and the other core Death Eaters clustered around him, howling with manic glee. "Dumbledore!" Voldemort's voice cut like glass. "You live, but this time you will watch your school, your students, and your hopeless hope turn to ash." The great battle was upon them. Dumbledore's face was steady. He raised the Elder Wand. Instantly, the castle's defenses flared to full strength. Layer upon layer of shimmering wards rose and stacked like the plates of the hardest shell encasing Hogwarts. Curses from the Death Eaters rained down in a torrent, smashing into the shields in thunderous explosions of light and sound. The wards buckled under the assault, but held. "Attack!" Professor McGonagall ordered. Teachers and students, buoyed by the castle's protections, launched a fierce counterattack. Spelllight braided and collided above the grounds, the air filled with the clamor of blasts, shouts, and pain. Wands flashed in every window, students held the battlements. Neville and Ginny led guerrilla strikes with the DA, using their knowledge of the castle to launch surprise attacks and vanish again. Fred and George's pranks, exploding dung bombs, skiving snack boxes repurposed as distractions, created chaos in the ranks of the attackers. Though Jiangwu could not wield large-scale spiritual power, she used her gift with plants to great effect. Vines and lichen along the castle walls came alive at her command, tangling the feet of incoming Death Eaters, slipping under boots, upsetting their balance. She cast precise small spells, striking where she could. It was a war of wildly unequal forces, but it was also a war of united hearts. Everyone fought to defend their home. Harry, Ron, and Hermione stayed close to Dumbledore. Their mission was clear: find and neutralize Nagini, and if possible, confront Voldemort himself. Inside and outside the castle that held so many dreams, the stage was set for the final conflict. In the dark between spells, the two forces met with the fiercest collision of all. Light and shadow hurled themselves against each other, and the Battle of Hogwarts began in earnest. Chapter 108: Perseverance and Support. Hogwarts trembles under the Death Eater's onslaught. The protective enchantment around the castle has been reduced to a flicker, like a candle in the wind. Every time a spell strikes it, the barrier ripples as if it might shatter at any second. Corridors smell of gunpowder, dust, and acrid potions, punctuated by the cries of the wounded and the shouts of combat. Professor McGonagall, leading the professors and the core DA members, holds the key passages stubbornly, but the strain of dwindling numbers is becoming painfully clear. Neville and Ginny's faces are smudged with soot, their wands nearly too heavy to lift, yet they keep turning back Death Eaters trying to breach the defenses. Hold on. For Hogwarts. McGonagall's voice is steady, though exhaustion lines her brow. At that desperate moment, deep in the castle, long forgotten and sealed passages, along with hidden tunnels used by house elves, stir and open. A wall disguised as a bookshelf slides aside, and the first figure to rush out is tall and solid in a faded Puddlemere United training robe, Oliver Wood, wand clenched in his fist. Behind him surge several similarly determined young wizards, his teammates. "I knew it," Wood bellows, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Hold the left! Keep them under the stairs! Treat it like defending the quaffle. Don't let them through." The Quidditch players he brings move with astonishing teamwork. Their spells come in perfect unison, like a counterattack practiced 1,000 times, and they shove back a group of Death Eaters trying to storm the main staircase. Almost at once, on the other side of the Great Hall, a large still-life painting of fruit slides open, and Charlie Weasley appears with a handful of friends who still carry a wild, feral look, men used to the thrum of beasts. They don't rely on stupefy so much as on binding and obstacle charms, and they fling hissing smoke bombs that smell of dragon's breath, creating chaotic fogs that throw the enemy into confusion and slow their advance. "Charlie," Ron calls out, surprised. "No time for pleasantries, Ron." Charlie shouts without looking back, and a brilliant spell fells a werewolf as he yells, "Clear these ones out first." They are not alone. More faces, familiar and new, pour into the castle through every route. Recent graduates, wizards who finished a year or two ago, and alumni who left school a decade or more back, people now scattered across different houses and professions, return because McGonagall and the Order of the Phoenix sent out secret calls for aid, and because they all share the fierce desire to protect Hogwarts. Ravenclaw Tower needs support. Enemies at the entrance to the Hufflepuff Common Room. Slytherin. "Well, some Slytherins are helping us too," someone calls, half amazed. The infusion of fresh forces immediately shifts the battle. These returnees bring combat experience and steadier spellcasting, and crucially, intimate knowledge of the castle itself. They use corridors and staircases for interception and coordination, turning the fight into a brutal tug-of-war that threatens to erupt in every hallway and chamber. Portraits shout enemy positions, suits of armor clank to life and join the fray. Peeves bounces through the melee, gleefully pelting Death Eaters' collars with water balloons stuffed with toad eggs. With its children come home, and fighting at its heart, Hogwarts reawakens, wild and tenacious. Chapter 109: Snake Shadow and Decision. In the highest tower window of the castle, Dumbledore and Lord Voldemort's duel had reached a fever pitch. There were no dazzling light shows or explosions, but the danger felt deeper than anywhere else. The two men moved like ghosts, spells clashing and deflecting in near silence, and the air throbbed with a suffocating magical pressure. No one else could approach, nor could they comprehend the deep, fundamental laws of magic those two were wielding. Below, in a corner of the main battlefield, Harry, Ron, and Hermione huddled behind a fallen stone pillar, eyes fixed on the huge slithering shadow beside Voldemort, Nagini. The giant snake stayed at her master's feet, eyes ruthless and watchful, her scarlet forked tongue flicking. Harry's scar burned painfully. He could feel the evil aura radiating from Nagini, different in activity but of the same origin as the other Horcruxes. "We have to kill that snake," Harry ground out. "But he's protecting her too well," Hermione snapped, deflecting a green bolt with a quick shield charm. "Someone needs to distract Voldemort, even for a second," Ron panted, face ashen. A commotion erupted at the edge of the battlefield. A figure moved through the chaos with astonishing speed and agility, weaving between flying spells and falling rubble. He wasn't aiming for Voldemort. He was heading straight for Nagini at the Dark Lord's feet. It was Cedric Diggory. He was back. His robes were torn, his face streaked with blood and fatigue, but his eyes shone with a sharpened resolve, a steadiness carved from every danger he'd survived. His appearance was sudden and decisive, and his presence pulled Voldemort's attention for a heartbeat, an instinctive mix of aversion and curiosity at this unexpected survivor. "Neville!" Hermione screamed. At her cry, Neville sprang like a coiled spring. He didn't raise his wand. He drew the gleaming, ruby-encrusted sword of Gryffindor from his belt. Nagini hissed, sensing the lethal threat. Her massive head reared up, fangs glinting, ready to strike. "Impedimenta! Leg locker curse! Petrificus totalis!" Ron, Harry, Hermione, and several members of the DA and older students nearby fired every binding and obstruction spell they could think of at the snake. Beams of magic struck Nagini, and for a brief, crucial instant her forward motion stilled. Rigid enough. Neville seized the moment. With both hands on the hilt, he charged and drove the sword straight into Nagini's gaping mouth. The blade sank through the upper palate and into her brain. There was a muffled, sickening thud. Nagini's vast body convulsed, scattering rubble, then collapsed heavily, twitching once or twice before lying utterly still. The last Horcrux was destroyed. No! Voldemort's howl cut the air, a sound not entirely human, raw pain, fury, and a disbelief that burned through him. Something vital in his soul had been torn away. The wound, struck at the very essence of his being, made his movements falter. Dumbledore did not miss the opening. He unleashed a concentrated, almost solid white beam that struck Voldemort and sent him staggering backward, his aura visibly shattered. Cedric, hit by the Dark Lord's uncontrolled magic as it surged from the wound, was flung against a distant wall and slid down, momentarily unable to rise. Harry breathed like he'd been freed from a weight he hadn't realized he carried. The cold, dirty bond that had always tied him to Voldemort had finally been severed. He looked up and saw, for the first time, genuine pain and fear on the Dark Lord's face, terror born of the Horcrux's destruction. Chapter 110, Endgame, Choices and Costs. The backlash from Nagini's death and the final severing of the Horcrux link crashed over Lord Voldemort like a tidal wave. His pale features were grotesquely twisted, his crimson eyes burning with a hysterical, concentrated hatred, but for the first time a thin thread of fear surfaced beneath it all, a fear of absolute annihilation. He steadied himself, no longer looking at Dumbledore but fixing every scrap of rage and remaining power on Harry Potter. "You," he hissed, voice trembling with furious intent. "Again and again, destroying everything I have. Even so, I can still end you with my own hand." He raised his U-wand high, abandoning finesse. He poured all the chaotic, enormous dark magic he had left into it. The green light that burst from the tip was blinding and dense, a soul-freezing aura of death, an almost unbearable killing curse, condensed with every ounce of his power and resentment, shot straight at Harry. The air around Harry seemed to be sucked dry. A chill of death gripped his heart and he could not move. At that critical moment, Dumbledore acted. He did not try to meet the spell with his body. Instead, with a swiftness that belied his age, he stepped between Harry and the green flash. The Elder Wand traced an intricate, ancient pattern through the air, its tip drawing a transparent barrier studded with runes. He spoke a few short words that thrummed with old power. The killing curse, a spell that could tear through anything, slammed into that barrier and seemed to sink into some invisible quagmire. Its speed abruptly faltered. The blinding green light thinned and dimmed, as if the lethal laws and dark energy within were being stripped away, decomposed, and neutralized by that binding power. By the time it reached Dumbledore's front, it had become nothing more than a harmless breath that ruffled his silver beard. "Impossible!" Voldemort shrieked, eyes wild. "The Elder Wand! It should obey me! I defeated its previous master!" "You always misunderstand the deepest magic, Tom," Dumbledore said calmly, his voice precise and heavy. "A wand chooses the wizard. True mastery does not come from murder, it comes from overcoming, from a living bond, and above all, from being entrusted with it. You seek immortality, but have never truly lived. You seek power, but do not understand that its source is life and love, not death and fear. That is why you can never truly defeat me, and why you are doomed to fail." Voldemort roared and tried to raise his wand again, but after the Horcrux's destruction, his magic was in unprecedented chaos, like oil at a rolling boil, impossible to gather. Dumbledore allowed him no respite. The Elder Wand rose again, leveled unerringly at Voldemort himself. "It's over." A pure white beam of light shot silently forward. Voldemort screamed and threw up layer upon layer of protective spells, but the white beam slid through them as if they were nothing. It entered his body with a gentle inevitability. Every movement froze. He lowered his head, staring at his chest as if expecting to see a wound. There was none. The furious hatred on his face hardened into a blank, absolute terror. He parted his lips as if to speak, but no sound came. Edges of his form blurred and grew transparent, like ash scattered by the wind. He shivered and faded, little by little dissolving into nothing. There was no cataclysmic explosion, no theatrical blaze of light. Tom Marvolo Riddle, the Dark Lord who had called the world to fear, simply and utterly ceased to be. Silence fell, thick and terrible, over the ruined battlefield. Then, as if a dam had broken, cheers and cries of relief surged up from every corner of the castle like an avalanche. Sunlight finally pierced the heavy clouds and fell upon the battered but standing towers of Hogwarts. Harry remained rooted, looking first at the place where Voldemort had been and then at the old headmaster before him, instantly aged, yet as steadfast as a rock. A storm of conflicting feelings swelled in his chest. An era had ended. End of the main narrative. What follows are the central storylines of the male and female protagonists, interspersed with the daily lives of the other characters. Chapter 111, Embers and Rebirth. The scars from the Hogwarts War were mended quickly enough by magic, but healing people's hearts would take far longer. Still, that summer, a stubborn new life was breaking through the soil. At 93 Diagon Alley, Weasley's Wizard Wheezes held a grand reopening that drew a crowd of eager witches and wizards. The shop had been considerably expanded, its windows filled with dazzling new products. The most striking sight, by far, was Fred Weasley at the doorway, his face a little pale, but his smile radiant. His presence alone was a miracle and the best advertisement anyone could ask for. "Ladies and gentlemen, old friends and new faces." George boomed through a magical megaphone shaped like a screaming mandrake. "After a summer of Mum's special nutritious meals, believe me, scarier than any dark arts, we're back, and we've got a brand new post-war recovery series." Fred took up the show, waving a brightly wrapped box of sweets. First up, proudly presenting hard-to-swallow blood-replenishing toffees, a perfect replica of Molly Weasley's recipe. Tastes like swamp mud, but take one and you'll have enough energy to wrestle a troll, celebrating our summer drowned in love and tonics. Laughter and applause rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Weasley stood nearby, dabbing at her eyes and scolding them with a fond smile. "You two rascals!" George held aloft a packet that looked like a plaster. Next, the dark mark disappearing patch easily covers wall graffiti, robe stains, and any little imperfection you'd rather not have to look at. Not effective on the real thing, of course, but sticking one on does wonders for the mood. Science is unclear. And a limited edition, Patronus Charm Chocolate Frogs. Fred shouted. "Eat one, and your Patronus might change. We're not sure, but this chocolate frog will certainly dance a breathtaking tango." Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Ginny were all working behind the counters, busier than they'd expected. Neville and Luna squeezed in among the customers. Hannah Abbott came with Jiang Wu. His attention was immediately caught by a display labeled Happy Dung Bombs, Gardening Special. The description promised specially fermented ingredients that gently nourish the soil and give a pleasant scent, also effective at repelling gnomes and goblins, and Hannah considered buying a few for comparative experiments in the greenhouse. Come and buy. Harry Potter tested and approved. Fred seized Harry, who was manning the till, and thrust a pack of super bubble-blowing gum into his hands. He can blow Potter-sized spectacles of bubbles with this. Last time he nearly got stuck inside one. Harry held the gum up, embarrassed, and the crowd laughed even harder. Sales surged. Hermione Granger's heartfelt recommendation, Exam Essential Peppermint Mints, George announced, nudging Hermione forward. She rolled her eyes but smiled. There was no denying the mints helped with concentration. The shop buzzed with activity and laughter. The air was a strange mix of candy sweetness, the earthy tang of dung bombs, and a long-forgotten clean joy. The war had left its marks, but life and laughter proved the most powerful kind of magic, and in their own unruly way, the Weasley twins were slowly drawing light back into people's hearts. Chapter 112, The Quiet Campus. Before the Newts' storm. The Hogwarts Express snorted and steamed, bringing students back to a castle that felt refreshed. Sunlight poured through the tall, newly cleaned windows, lighting up the recently rehung portraits lining the corridors. Those portraits chattered nonstop about their heroic deeds in the war. But beneath the bright polish, there was a familiar, stomach-tightening pressure in the air. Exam year had arrived. For 7th years, this was the ultimate test. Newts and owls looming over every waking hour. For 6th years like Jiang Wu, it meant being the most senior non-graduates in the school. A little more freedom, a little more responsibility, and a steady simmer of pre-owl's anxiety. At the start of term feast, Headmistress McGonagall sat at the head table, dignified and proper, and spoke in a clear, steady voice. Hogwarts has withstood the test and is stronger than ever. That resilience should be reflected in your pursuit of knowledge. Her eyes swept the great hall. 7th years, this is your final sprint, and 6th years. She paused, her gaze lingering on certain faces. You must lay a solid foundation for next year's challenges and help maintain order in the school. Be role models for the younger students. Role models? Seamus Finnegan whispered to Dean Thomas at the Hufflepuff table. Does that mean we can officially patrol, and while we're at it, scout corners for new Weasley product testing spots? Dean chuckled and nodded. The real pressure, however, settled on the 7th and 5th years, and the library turned into a battlefield. Madame Pince presiding like a dragon over her hoard, watching any student who dared approach the shelves. The 7th year section felt as heavy as a potions classroom. I'd rather fight a troll again, Ron Weasley moaned, burying his head in advanced charms theory. How did Bill get all O's? Did he inherit a clever brain in secret? Hermione Granger looked up from behind a precarious stack of notes, eyes sharp. Bill worked for them, Ron. And if you spent half as much time on this book as you do on the twins' Newt's Lifeline product catalog, it wouldn't seem so impenetrable. And give me back that ancient rune's root evolution under your left hand. You're sitting on it. Nearby, Harry Potter was struggling with the complex steps in advanced potion making when his wand twitched and with a soft pop, the ink on Lisa Turpin's parchment sogged and briefly took on the shape of a rubber tadpole that tried to wriggle away. Sorry, Turpin, Harry blurted, embarrassed enough to feel like he'd seen a Dementor. Concentrate, Harry, Hermione admonished without looking up. At the 6th year table, the mood was more relaxed. They weren't yet in the direct line of fire for graduation, and they enjoyed more freedom than younger students. Jiang Wu didn't rush into theory. She preferred practice. Most of her time was spent in the expanded greenhouse, which served as a crucial practical base for both herbology and potions. She was working on grafting the soothing properties of the concentration flower to the calming effects of moongrass, using a unique method of channeling spiritual energy while mentally simulating potion steps that might be required in the owls. Neville Longbottom, now Professor Sprout's official assistant, wandered by carrying a somewhat droopy venomous tentacula. He peered at Jiang Wu's experiment and leaned closer in curiosity. Wow, your grafting technique is clever. It seems more fluid than the method in 1,000 magical herbs and fungi. Just an experiment, Jiangwu said without looking up, carefully securing the scion. I changed the energy channel construction. For your tentacula, spores from the newly transplanted shimmering fungi in the North District have drifted over. It's allergic to them. Neville's face cleared with understanding. Right. Thank you, Jiangwu. He hurried the tentacula away from the contaminated area. Ginny Weasley, also a sixth year, found her owl's pressure eased by Quidditch tryout invitations. She split her time between the pitch and the library and often dragged Luna Lovegood along to study. Luna was prone to spotting academic interference pixies and would try to ward them off with necklaces made of butterbeer bottle corks, an odd remedy that somehow calmed Ginny's nerves. The privileges of sixth years also meant earlier access to the latest Weasleys, Wizard Wheezes gadgets. Trinkets promising to improve memory, enhance concentration, or temporarily increase luck circulated discreetly among the sixth years. Their effects were hit or miss, and their side effects wildly unpredictable. Someone who ate lucky gummies excelled in charms, but ended up with half their hair transformed into feathers during transfiguration class. But they provided plenty of comic relief during exam preparation. An owl brought a letter from Cedric Diggory, full of descriptions of the Egyptian desert and the mysteries of ancient tombs. He enclosed a small bag of fine golden sand and a few strange beetle shell-like objects. Hope these give you new inspiration for your research. Don't stress too much about owls. You'll be fine. P.S. Watch out for the scarabs here. They're much more troublesome than flobberworms. Jiangwu sent a reply along with a small bottle of her specially made calming powder, refined from the stamens of her latest cultivated concentration flowers. Her note read, "The desert is dry. Take care." New progress in herbology practice. The owls still require memorization. Those scarab shells might be medicinal, pending further research. Life at the castle settled into a rhythm of pressure, small adventures, and distant worries. Owls were coming, but for Jiangwu and her sixth-year classmates, there was still time to grow, and to leave room for a little harmless chaos on the way to becoming the role models McGonagall expected. Chapter 113, Quidditch and Academic Exchange. In October, Hogwarts carried more than the bite of autumn on the wind. The air around the Quidditch pitch was alive with shouting and cheers. It was the first match of the year, Gryffindor versus Slytherin. After the great battle, house competition had a new edge, no longer only a contest of pride, but a demonstration that the castle was alive and determined. The stands were packed, the sea of red from Gryffindor particularly striking. Ron and Hermione had temporarily abandoned their NUT textbooks, watching anxiously. Ginny Weasley, Gryffindor chaser and captain, sliced through the air like a streak of red lightning, organizing attacks with crisp efficiency. "She's a genius!" Ron shouted, waving his fists and nearly knocking the binoculars from Hermione's hands. "Did you see that pass? A feint! Definitely a feint!" Hermione dodged his arm with an exasperated look. "Ron, the match doesn't need a running commentary, and your NET's charms essay." "Don't mention essays, Hermione. Today is Quidditch Day." Ron cut in, eyes glued to the pitch. Nearby in the Hufflepuff section, Hannah Abbott and Jiangwu watched from the same bench. Hannah was utterly absorbed in the game. Jiangwu had one eye on the match and the other on a thick volume on cultivating rare Mediterranean fungi. She glanced up only occasionally, more focused on how to adapt a sun refraction humidification technique from the book for her greenhouse experiments. "Merlin, look!" Hannah grabbed Jiangwu's sleeve and pointed skyward. Slytherin's Seeker, a large sixth-year student, attempted a risky pock-off ploy to unsettle Ginny. Ginny executed an almost impossible dive, just missing his sweep, then hauled herself upright in a violent, elegant curve. Her long red hair sketched a bright arc across the sky, drawing gasps and then a roar from the crowd. "That was close." Hannah patted her chest. "Her instantaneous acceleration and angle calculations are so precise." Jiangwu gave an objective nod without looking away from her page. Considering a firebolt's standard performance and the wind speed at the time, Hannah fell silent and watched the rest of the match. In the end, Ginny caught the golden snitch with a spectacular dive, and Gryffindor exploded into celebration. The castle buzzed long after the final whistle, but in a quieter corner, the library, another kind of exchange was underway. Michael Corner and Anthony Goldstein, both Ravenclaws, were bent over parchments thick with ancient runes and odd array diagrams, whispering to Jiang Wu. Several sheets lay spread out like a small battlefield of ink and glyphs. So, Jiang, do you think if this variant of the ancient rune's protection rune is rotated 15 degrees counterclockwise and then overlaid with a simplified Eastern spirit gathering structure, it could fine-tune the energy consumption of our portable magic barrier? Michael asked, dark circles under his eyes. Anthony added, we tried several combinations. Either the mana drains too fast, or the shield is unstable. The OWL's Ancient Runes Practical requires his students to design a working rune combo. If this works, we'll get an outstanding. Jiangwu closed her fungi book and studied their diagrams. After a moment, she said, rotating it counterclockwise will disturb the energy flow and invite fluctuations. Try keeping the original angle, but swap the magic injection points on the third and fifth strokes. Also, use the concept of condensation rather than gathering. That way, the external magic is guided to replenish the system slowly instead of being forcefully drawn in. It will be steadier and consume less. She picked up a quill and sketched a few directional arrows and simplified symbols in the margin. Michael and Anthony lit up as if someone had thrown open a window. Merlin, you can do it like that! This is so much clearer than anything in the Compendium of Magical Symbols, Michael breathed. Thank you, Jiang. You're practically a Ravenclaw treasure, Anthony chimed. It's just energy conservation, Jiang Wu said mildly, closing her book and reaching for it again. Try it out. And Goldstein, on page 147 of Intermediate Magical Script Applications, there's a failed case with a similar structure you can learn from. Anthony flipped to the page and found the case, impressed by the breadth of her memory. Requests like this, from students in other houses, had become common. Jiang Wu's thinking blended Eastern and Western magical concepts in ways that solved practical problems. She had developed a small reputation among upper years for creative, usable solutions on OWL projects. She was willing to share her ideas, but she also accepted favors in kind, borrowed rights to rare Eastern magical plant guides, help collecting tricky experimental materials, or moss samples from dark corners near the Slytherin common room. Cedric's owl occasionally delivered odd stones or dried North African plant samples with terse notes on their provenance. In return, Jiang Wu's replies focused on analyzing the samples and slipped in bits of Hogwarts news. Peeves had been especially keen on pranks using Fred and George's new rainbow fart bombs, filling corridors with colorful, strangely scented smoke. Madame Bellwether had started drilling potion basics so relentlessly that shortcut-seeking students were grumbling. Days passed in a steady rhythm. The clamor of Quidditch, the hush of the library, the bright green of the greenhouse, and the small, practical trades that made student life hum. The pressure of the OWLs was like distant thunder, always there, faint, but for sixth-year Jiang Wu there was time to prepare, step by careful step. The pressure of the owls hung like a bank of storm clouds on the horizon, not yet upon them, but close enough that sixth years darted about and library seats became harder and harder to snatch. Still, there were places to forget exams for a little while. The Hufflepuff Common Room, or Jiang Wu's second greenhouse. This afternoon, Jiang Wu was engaged in a delicate operation. Using only a trace of spiritual power, she was guiding a newly cultivated moon moss to release its special calming spores and funneling them into a small glazed bottle she'd made for stronger soothing sachets. She held her breath, fingertips glowing with a faint, soft light as she carefully moderated the flow of power. Under her control, the moon moss trembled and let loose a scatter of almost invisible, shimmering spores that drifted toward the bottle's mouth. At that moment, the greenhouse door was flung open. Jiang Wu, look what we found! Hannah Abbott and Susan Bones charged in, breathless and excited. Hannah brandished a wriggling, spiky, deep purple tuber like a prize. The sudden noise and movement made Jiang Wu's hands shake. Her control slipped. With a soft poof, the moon moss, seemingly tickled, blew out a much larger, far more concentrated cloud of silver spores that sprayed straight into her face. Achoo! Achoo! Caught off guard, Jiang Wu inhaled several of the spores and erupted into a string of uncontrollable sneezes. Tears streamed down her face. Worse, the spores had a powerful calming effect. The sneezing left her dizzy, her eyelids heavy, and her legs wobbling as she nearly toppled into a nearby compost bin. Merlin, Jiangwu, are you all right? Hannah and Susan rushed forward to support her. I'm fine. Jiangwu's voice came out thick and nasal, her eyes a little glassy. She fought to stay upright. Just sleepy. What did you find? Hannah tried not to laugh at the sight. Jiangwu's dark hair and long lashes dusted with sparkling silver spores, her expression a muddled mix of embarrassment and concentration. Oh, we found this at the edge of the forbidden forest. A sting fruit, she said, holding the tuber up. They say it's good for pranks. It explodes and gives off a foul smell when squeezed. But you look like you need a stimulating draught more than a joke right now. Susan smiled and produced a small bottle from her pocket. Madame Pomfrey gave me an improved stimulating draught. Drink this. Jiangwu took the bottle in a daze and sipped. A spicy rush hit her palate and cleared her head almost immediately, though her nose stayed pink and the spores in her hair glittered stubbornly. She blinked and, with the same instinct that always surfaced when her head was clear, steered the conversation back to the subject at hand. So, a sting fruit, she said, voice still a little wheezy but sharp in curiosity. Is its explosion caused by instantaneous internal pressure release? Have the odor compounds been analyzed? Does it require a specific soil pH? Hannah and Susan laughed outright at the contrast. Jiangwu utterly disheveled, yet utterly keen on analysis. Hannah handed over the still wriggling tuber. Here you go, great scholar. Research it yourself. Just don't get any more strange things on you. Jiangwu took the sting fruit seriously, examining it with steady fingers as if it were a specimen in a lab, completely oblivious to how comical she looked. Hannah and Susan exchanged amused looks and left her to it. By evening, the common room was warm and cozy. The hearth blazed and the air carried the smell of toast and sweet tea. Small groups of students were scattered about, studying or chatting. Jiangwu had cleaned up and returned to form, sitting at the window table with cultivation of rare Mediterranean fungi open in front of her. Notes about the sting fruit lay beside the book. Cedric's latest letter and a little bag of odd North African sand were set to one side. Hannah and Susan were handing out new Honeydukes candies to younger students amid bursts of laughter. A first year, stuck on his astronomy homework, timidly asked a prefect for help and received a patient explanation. Neville Longbottom passed by with a pot of Mimbulus Mimbletonia, looking unusually cheerful. Spotting the sting fruit on Jiangwu's table, Neville warned, "Be careful, Jiangwu, those things have a temper. It nearly sprayed me last time." Before he finished, Jiangwu had already pinched a particular section of the tuber. It calmed at once, the furious wriggling stopping as though under a spell. She picked up a small knife, deftly sliced off a sliver, and began to examine its interior structure with the focused intensity of someone in her element. Neville stood, surprised, then rubbed his nose and continued on. This ordinary domestic quiet was a kind of miracle after the war. No Dark Lord looming, no life-or-death stakes, only exams to worry about, friendly teasing, and the small pleasures of research. For Jiangwu, the ability to spend days absorbed in plants and experiments, surrounded by friends and the gentle warmth of Hufflepuff, felt like the best life she could ask for. Chapter 115, Owl's Written Exam Week and Last-Minute Cramming. The cold November winds swept through Hogwarts, and with them came the tight, tense hush of Owl Week. The castle's mood shifted almost overnight. Students muttered to themselves, hunched over parchment and textbooks in every corridor. Common rooms stayed lit later and later. Even Peeves seemed to sense the solemnity. His pranks had dwindled to almost nothing. In the Hufflepuff common room, the fire still cast a warm glow, but the usual easy chatter had been replaced by focused, head-down studying. One boy had History of Magic notes spread across his lap, buttered bread in his mouth as he mumbled dates of goblin rebellions. Another wrestled with a complicated magic theory chart, brow furrowed in concentration. Jiangwu, normally composed, had several thick tomes stacked before her. Intermediate potion theory, compendium of magical herb properties, applied analysis of ancient runes among them. She wasn't cramming at the last minute, so much as running a systematic review, making sure her theoretical knowledge was flawless. Her study method still carried her personal touch. She linked points from different subjects. When memorizing a potion recipe, she'd consider the growth habits and optimal harvest times of the main herbs and the meanings of any runic symbols involved. "I'm finished. I'm truly finished," Hannah wailed, collapsing onto the sofa. "Why did Merlin invent something like History of Magic? Why couldn't those old goblins just behave?" "Because they wanted the right to use wands, Hannah," Susan said without looking up. Page 14, third paragraph. "Oh, shut up, Susan," Hannah said weakly, picking up another piece of cake. The common room door pushed open, and Neville Longbottom poked his head in, looking a little embarrassed. Excuse me, Jiang Wu? Professor Sprout asked me to ask about that method you mentioned before, using a mix of moon petal and Ninglu grass juice to stabilize bubotuber pus. What were the exact proportions and the stirring direction? Madame Bell's very interested, and it might be a high-scoring extension for the owl potions practical. Jiang Wu looked up from her notes, thought for a moment, and answered smoothly. 3 drops of moon petal juice, 5 drops of Ninglu grass juice. Stir 7.5 times counterclockwise. The infusion must be steady and uninterrupted. That should raise the success rate by about 15%. Neville fished a small notebook from his pocket and scribbled it down. "Thank you so much. By the way, how's your studying going?" He glanced at the books and offered an encouraging smile. "Keep at it. You'll get through. You know, the year I took my owls..." Hannah's wail cut him off. "Don't remind us you went through this, Neville. That just makes us more desperate." Neville rubbed the back of his head, gave a sheepish laugh, and slipped away. When exam week arrived, the Great Hall had been cleared and rearranged into individual cubicles to prevent peeking. Professor McGonagall and the other teachers patrolled with solemn faces. The sound of rustling quills on parchment, the occasional nervous sigh, and the excited or frustrated chatter as students compared answers afterward made up the soundtrack of the week. Jiang Wu stayed as calm as ever during the exams. Her papers were clean, her answers neat and logically ordered. When questions demanded divergent thinking or practical insight, her responses showed an unusual depth, occasionally prompting surprise from the examining professors, and at other times requiring them to consult reference texts to confirm her reasoning. After the potions theory exam, she ran into Hermione Granger in a corridor. Hermione, unusually animated, wanted to talk over an extra credit question about how the skin of an African tree snake changes in solutions of differing pH. She praised Jiang Wu's suggestion to pre-treat with the slightly acidic spore environment of moon petal moss to enhance toughness. "That's very clever. Madame Pomfrey might be interested," Hermione said, eyes bright with the mutual recognition that passed between top students. "It's just logical deduction from material properties," Jiang Wu replied calmly. Owl Week carried its share of superstitions and small absurdities alongside the grind. Some students swore by stroking Madame Norris before an exam, usually ending up chased halfway down the corridor. A few took Weasley's lucky lollies and insisted they sharpened their multiple-choice instincts, likely placebo, but morale matters. One boy dreamt the night before History of Magic that Professor Binns had personally highlighted the key points, only to find that half of his dream hadn't been on the paper at all. Those little interludes, nervous rituals, whispered jokes, the frantic sharing of last-minute tips were playful notes in an otherwise tense symphony, loosening the pressure just enough to get everyone through. For Jiang Wu, the written exams were busy, but went according to plan. She looked forward to the practicals. Those, she thought, would be the true stage to show what she could do. Chapter 116, Practical Exam. The smoke of the written exams had hardly cleared when the practical portion of the owls began. For students like Jiang Wu, who were stronger with hands-on work, these tests were an opportunity to shine. Charms was overseen by Professor Flitwick, who called out instructions in his high, excited voice. "Excellent, Miss Brown, that cheering charm is splendid. One almost wants to dance. Next, Miss Dupin, please demonstrate the Patronus charm." Jiang Wu was asked to perform a difficult nonverbal task, make a suit of armor execute a simple tap dance. She flicked her wand without a word. The suit stiffened, and then, with a few clanking steps, lifted its legs and tapped the floor. The movement was not graceful, but it fulfilled the requirements precisely. Flitwick clapped delightedly. Very precise magical control. 5 points to Hufflepuff. Transfiguration was conducted by Professor McGonagall, and the room felt even more solemn. The assignment required turning a hedgehog into a pincushion and arranging the pins into the Hogwarts crest, a test of both technical control and aesthetic judgment. Jiangwu's pincushion had neat, dense stitching, a clear, tidy crest, and pinheads that shone with a metallic gleam. McGonagall's stern face softened just enough to show the faintest hint of approval, and she inclined her head. The two most important practical exams, potions and herbology, fell on the same day. Potions took place in the dungeons under Madame Belby's sharp scrutiny. The students had to brew a complex draught of living death, a task that demanded absolute precision and patience. Jiang Wu's workspace was, as always, immaculate. Her motions were quick and controlled. When it came time to extract the juice from sleeping pods, she didn't crush them with the side of a silver knife, as the textbook recommended. Instead, she dipped her fingers in a bit of homemade clear gel and gently rubbed the pods. The gentler method drew out every drop without losing potency or introducing impurities. Madame Belby paused at her bench, surprised, then moved on without comment, though she did jot something down on her score sheet. Everything ran smoothly until the very end. As Jiangwu reached to add the final ingredient, the nervous Ravenclaw boy beside her toppled his brass scales. Several beetle eyeballs rolled free and headed straight for the space beneath Jiangwu's cauldron. If any stuck to the rim or slipped in, they would ruin the potion. Jiangwu's pupils narrowed. Almost without thinking, the wrist holding her glass stirring rod executed a hair's-breadth flick and lift. No one saw the motion clearly, only that the tip of the rod seemed to kiss the rolling eyeballs at an impossible angle and, as if playing a delicate game of billiards, guided them to an empty spot nearby. The whole maneuver was silent and did not interrupt her other hand, which was ready to pour the final ingredient. Madame Belby caught that lightning-quick moment. She raised an eyebrow and opened her mouth, but ultimately said nothing. Instead, she fixed Jiangwu with a long look and made a few extra notes on the sheet. Jiangwu's face betrayed nothing. She added the last component, stirred the cauldron 7.5 times counterclockwise, and took the heat off. Her draught of living death shone with a perfect, pearly luster. The afternoon herbology practical in the greenhouse felt almost like coming home. Professor Sprout and her assistant Neville examined the students on identifying, handling, and explaining cultivation techniques for various dangerous plants. Jiang Wu answered questions smoothly and handled every specimen with care. When it came time to divide a newly introduced temperamental biting cabbage, her gentle, almost conversational approach coaxed the plant into cooperating. Professor Sprout nodded repeatedly, and Neville watched from the side with obvious admiration. "Excellent, Miss Zhang," Professor Sprout praised. "Your understanding of plant characteristics and your handling techniques surpass many NEWT-level students." 10 points to Hufflepuff. When the last practical concluded, a wave of exhaustion and relief washed over the students. They had climbed most of the exam mountain. Whatever the results, they had done their best. The castle's atmosphere eased, corridors filled not with anxious whispers about spells and formulas, but with excited talk of the upcoming Christmas holiday and the relief of a break from study. For once, Jiangwu didn't head straight to the greenhouse or the library. Hannah and Susan grabbed her by the arms and dragged her toward the kitchens for a cup of hot cocoa, eager to celebrate their hard-earned reprieve. The tension of exams slowly melted away with the falling snow, and Hogwarts was draped in silver for its first Christmas after the Great War. The castle was hung with holly and mistletoe, and the sweet scents of roasted chestnuts and treacle tart drifted through the corridors, lending a peaceful, festive air. For the 6th years, it was a holiday to truly relax. No looming tests, no shadow of the Dark Lord, only winter's languor and the pleasure of the season. The Hufflepuff common room was especially warm, the fire giving off a fresh pine scent. Many students stayed at school to enjoy the castle's holiday charm. Hannah Abbott and Susan Bones were busy decorating a small fir with enchanted snowflakes and glowing berries. "A little to the left, Susan. Yes, there!" Hannah directed. "Are these berries too bright? Will I be kept awake?" Susan fretted. "It's Christmas," Hannah said, dismissive. "It should sparkle." Jiangwu sat in a soft armchair by the hearth with a thick blanket over her legs, reading the latest letter and parcel from Cedric. His letter was longer than usual, full of accounts of tracking a cold-loving demagogues in the Norwegian forests. Twisty, interesting work, every line alive with excitement. The package included a small pouch of Norwegian permafrost that seemed to hold starlight, a few silver berries said to be favored by demagogues that gave off a faint minty scent, and a slightly blurry muggle photograph of the aurora. The winter here is cold enough to freeze a wizard's nose off, but the aurora at night is something else, like Merlin spilled his paints across the sky. The photo can't capture even a tenth of it. I hope the permafrost helps your research. Merry Christmas. Woo. Sweet dreams. Jiangwu let her fingers brush the permafrost, feeling the peculiar cold energy within. She picked up a silver berry, sniffed it carefully, and after confirming it was non-toxic and stable, tucked it away. The aurora photo found a place in the protective sleeve of her notebook. Her return gift had already been sent, a small bottle of warm sun essential oil, distilled from the essences of a newly cultivated concentration flower and a sunlight orchid, good for soothing frostbitten skin, and a pair of thick wool socks woven with warming and protection charms. Wow, Cedric sends great things again, Hannah said, having finished the tree and leaned over to look. Norwegian permafrost? Sounds amazing. He finds all sorts of strange and wonderful things, Susan added. He has a special job, Jiangwu said simply, putting the sample away. Lucky you, Susan sighed with a hint of envy. Someone gets presents from all over the world. We'll probably just get the Honeyduke's Christmas tin. Honeyduke's is excellent, Jiangwu replied evenly. The Christmas feast in the Great Hall was lavish and lively. Headmaster Dumbledore persuaded the professors to add some small magics to the evening's entertainment. Professor Flitwick conjured a flock of golden birds that sang carols. Professor Sprout coaxed plants into bearing icicles and candy in the center of the hall. Even Professor McGonagall, despite her stern expression, transfigured everyone's goblets into ridiculous hats of different colors with precise flicks of her wand. Gift exchange brought its usual surprises. Hannah and Susan gave Jiangwu a set of fine crystal potion bottles. Neville gave her a pot of starlight moss that glowed softly, and a pair of impossibly bright socks with tiny pumpkin patterns, quietly slipped to her by Dobby, who marveled at knitting as much as mischief. Jiangwu had prepared gifts of her own, a carefully cultivated miniature potted plant that released a calming scent for Hannah, an obscure, fascinating book on the history of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement for Susan, and a mixed packet of rare herb seeds for Neville. On Christmas Eve, the common room filled with students sharing kitchen treats, playing gobstones or wizard's chess, and lounging on sofas in small knots of conversation. Outside, snow came down in soft silence. Inside, it felt like spring, warm and full of laughter. Jiangwu didn't join the games. She sat in her usual window seat, reading a book on Nordic magical flora by the firelight, occasionally comparing notes with the permafrost sample and silver berries Cedric had sent. She would glance up at Hannah and Susan arguing fiercely over a chess move, or at Neville showing the Mimbulus Mimbletonia's latest talent to a group of first years. The ordinary, warm rhythm of these small moments gave her a deep satisfaction. The shadow of the war had receded at last, and life's true priorities, study, friendship, small distant affections, and holiday comforts, felt precious again. On Christmas morning, there was an extra present by her pillow. Unmarked and simply wrapped, it contained a handmade dark green scarf with the faint scent of camphor wood and moonflower. The stitches were fine and snug, warm to the touch. In one corner, nearly invisible, an abstract pattern of a badger and an eagle was embroidered in very fine silver thread. She wrapped the scarf around her neck and felt the soft warmth settle against her skin. Snow still fell outside the window, and Hogwarts was quiet and at peace. It was a wonderful Christmas. Chapter 118, New Semester Begins. The bell that marked the start of term rang through the castle like a gentle wake-up call, stirring the long dormant life in the ancient stone. Students poured back onto the grounds in a tide of chatter and laughter, filling corridors and classrooms until the once quiet castle hummed with activity. The tension of the owls had only just dissipated. Older students could finally breathe, though unease lingered because results were not yet out. Still, new challenges had arrived quietly, choosing NET courses. For many, those choices were urgent. Each class had to be weighed against interests, career plans, and practical ability. In the Hufflepuff common room, everyone was talking about it. Hannah sighed, "I want to be a healer, but healers have to be brilliant at both potions and transfiguration. My transfiguration isn't very good." Susan patted her hand. "You can do it. You're so careful and thorough. You're perfect for it. I want to go into the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, like my aunt." Others dreamed of returning home to raise magical creatures. Some fancied cultivating rare herbs, and a few wanted to open a shop in Hogsmeade. That afternoon, Jiangwu and Cedric, freshly back at school, were summoned to Professor Sprout's office. Professor Sprout greeted them with a smile. "Cedric, Bill Weasley sent a letter praising your work on that curse-breaking job." Cedric grinned. "Still learning, but it's fascinating." Professor Sprout turned to Jiang. "Miss Jiang, have you thought about your future? With your skills in herbology and potions, both St. Mungo's and the Ministry would be clamoring for you. You'd also be welcome to stay and help me teach." Jiang thought for a moment. "Thank you, Professor, but I prefer to do my own research. I don't think I'd like being tied to one place." Cedric added, "She has plans. Things like combining Eastern planting techniques with our magical herbology. That kind of work needs freedom." Professor Sprout nodded. "I see. Like Newt Scamander, it's not easy. For your NWTs, definitely continue with herbology and potions. Ancient runes will help, and arithmancy could be useful for research calculations." When their meeting ended, the two walked out together. Cedric teased, "Independent research? Sounds impressive, but you'll have to find your own funding and topics, won't you?" Jiang shrugged. "It's simpler than dealing with office politics." She glanced at the dust on his robes and smiled. "And you seem to be able to bring back a lot of strange materials for me." "No problem, Researcher Jiang," Cedric said with a laugh, dusting himself off. "Next time I'll bring you soil from a pyramid." Before she could reply, Peeves materialized out of nowhere, clutching a handful of stink bombs and grinning maniacally. "Graduates and bookworms, take that!" Cedric reacted instantly. A quick flick of his wand, "Protego." The stink bomb struck an invisible barrier with wet splats and fell harmlessly to the floor. Peeves shrieked in fury, flinging himself about and making awful faces. "Nice reflexes, Cursebreaker," Nong said calmly. Cedric put his wand away and chuckled. "Part of the job." He cast a sideways glance at Peeves, who was still making a scene. "Always have to deal with ancient curses and mischievous poltergeists." They walked on past the uproar, the castle's old stones once more echoing with the familiar, chaotic life of another school year beginning. Chapter 119. The Deal Between the Researcher and the Cursebreaker. Peeves cursed as he phased through the wall, leaving a faint reek of rotten eggs in his wake. Cedric flicked his wrist, and a breeze from the tip of his wand dispersed the odor. "Cursebreakers even manage air quality?" Jiangwu raised an eyebrow. "Part of the after-sales service," Cedric said with a disarming smile as he fell into step beside her on the spiral staircase. "Mostly, I'm just afraid Researcher Zhang will be in a bad mood and refuse the strange materials I bring next time." Sunlight streamed through the tall windows and slanted over his sharp profile. Compared to his youth, there were a few more lines on his face, traces of a steadiness honed by wind and sand, but he still spoke about his work beneath the pyramids with that same casual ease. Jiangwu knew his expeditions were dangerous. He always made them sound routine. She drew a notebook from her dragonhide pouch, the one Cedric had brought back from his last trip, and flipped it open. "Next time you're in North Africa, keep an eye out for a plant called sun goldfinch. Local wizards call it Ra's feather. It supposedly only grows under the purest, sun-baked sand. Its sap has a strange affinity for light." Cedric took the notebook, studying her neat handwriting and the vivid sketches annotated with possible magical properties. He examined it as if reading an old rune. "Got it," he said. "Sounds like a close relative of certain curse-warding plants. I'll keep an eye out." They reached the castle entrance, where younger students chased one another across the lawn. Cedric checked his watch. His free time was short. He had errands in Hogsmeade. "Oh, by the way," he said, stopping as a thought struck him. I ran into the Weasley twins in Hogsmeade. Their business is booming. They heard you have some special herbs and want to make new products. Candies that make people burst into song for plants, or shampoos that blow hair up like dandelions and patchy bald with a gust. Jong-woo pictured the twins' grinning faces and couldn't help the twitch at the corner of her mouth. Are they trying to turn the whole school into a walking compost heap and a laughingstock? She paused, then shrugged. Still, it sounds like a logistical nightmare. Tell them to bring a proposal and some galleons. Cedric laughed. I knew you'd be interested. I really must go. I'll have an owl send the dragon dung fertilizer to the greenhouse. Deal. Exchange for pyramid soil, she said, waving him off as she turned toward the greenhouse, already calculating whether the sun goldfinch could be coaxed to grow and how feasible the twins' outlandish order might be. Cedric watched her quick, purposeful stride, smiled, and melted into the crowd heading for Hogsmeade. In this post-war world, full of mysteries and new possibilities, the two of them were busy in very different but parallel ways. One dove into ancient texts and legends, tracing the origins of old curses, analyzing every clue, and testing every angle to break them. The other labored in desolate soils and glass houses, cultivating peculiar plants and experimenting with methods to coax unprecedented magic from them. Their goals were not the same, but both were pushing the boundaries of a changed world. Their stubbornness and curiosity, one scholarly, one practical, might yet bring new hope and unexpected discoveries. The Hufflepuff common room always smelled like home, damp earth, warm cookies, and the green, growing tang of plants. Conversation about careers and NET choices was a constant, the liveliest thread in the room's gentle hum. Jong-woo threaded through the clusters of students debating healer training versus the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, smiled at Hannah and Susan's argument, but didn't join. She had a destination in mind, Greenhouse 3 behind the castle, where her latest experiment took root. Professor Sprout had kindly given her a small, private plot to give Hufflepuff's most restless gardening genius some room to cause mischief, as the professor had put it. Jong's plot was marked off with short wooden stakes she had brought from the east, each one carved with faint warding sigils. The little enclosure kept whatever energy or scent her experiments gave off, from troubling the shy plants in the other greenhouses. In the center, the soil was a deep, velvet black that stood out against Hogwarts' ordinary dark brown earth, the ground she had enriched with the breathing earth seed. It thrummed with life, hungry and eager. She was crouched on her heels, working the soil with a small jade trowel as she buried several moonlight lotus seeds, seeds from the east she'd been soaking in a special potion. Moonlight lotus petals were a key ingredient in advanced calming draughts, but they were notoriously difficult to raise in Europe. So absorbed was she in the careful work that she didn't notice someone slipping into the greenhouse until a hushed voice asked, "Merlin's beard, Jang. What are you up to now?" Ernie Macmillan stood a few paces away, face full of curiosity and a touch of caution. He held several thick guides to magical plants and kept his distance so as not to tread on anything fragile. Attempting to naturalize the moonlight lotus for cultivation, Jong said simply, without looking up, "If it works, Madame Pomfrey won't have to complain about shortages whenever she brews a powerful calming draught." "Cool." Ernie's eyes brightened. Then he sniffed the air and made a face. "But your plot smells different. Strong. Stronger than dragon dung, almost." Jong didn't change her expression. The breathing earth seed fed soil with the scent of ancient, pure earth, an aroma unfamiliar to someone used to ordinary fertilizers. "An ancient Eastern fertilizer," she said. It was not exactly a lie. The breathing earth seed functioned much like a high-grade fertilizer, although its nature was more complex. Ernie nodded, half understanding, and was about to ask another question when a frantic flapping at the greenhouse window interrupted them. A dusty, keen-eyed owl, one built for long-distance travel, was pecking at the glass, a large parcel bound to its leg. Jong opened the window. The bird hopped in, held out its leg, and waited. She unfastened the package. It gave off the dry, hot smell of grit and old stone. A neat inscription on the parcel read, "From the Phoenix excavation site, handle with care." Cedric had sent her the pyramid soil he'd promised. Ernie's mouth dropped open. "Merlin? From Egypt? Cedric Diggory sent that?" Jiang placed the parcel on a nearby table and rewarded the owl with a few roasted nuts she had concocted from nutritious grass seeds the greenhouse supplied. Owls loved them. The bird hooted once in appreciation and launched back into the night. Jiang slit the wrapping open. Inside was not ordinary sand, but a grainy, golden soil that glittered with tiny flecks. It felt warm to the touch, as though it contained the condensed midday sun of the desert. "Is that pyramid soil?" Ernie leaned forward, but hesitated to touch it. "It looks very magical." Jiang pinched a sample and felt a faint, peculiar aura, a scorched, ancient power from long exposure to sun and ritual magic. It was nothing like the gentle warmth of Hogwarts earth or the restless life of the breathing earth seed. A researcher's excitement flashed across her features. "Perfect," she murmured. She picked up an empty pot, laid in a base of regular Hogwarts soil, and folded a little of the pyramid sand into it. From her pocket, she produced a small cloth bag containing a handful of sun goldfinch seeds. Seeds she'd already been nurturing with breathing earth energy. This was an attempt at a crossbreed using related Eastern stock, based on the hints Cedric had sketched out in his letter. She set the seeds into the mixed soil and covered them. Almost instantly, the pot vibrated. The golden grains seemed to wake, the flecks glowed and slowly swirled toward the buried seeds. Heat radiated from the mix, stimulating rather than scorching. Ernie watched, wide-eyed. "It moved. Is this soil alive?" "It's a magical reaction," Jiang said, already scribbling notes in her book. "Different soils carry different magical histories and energies. They interact. Pyramid soil has been sun-baked and saturated by ancient magic, full of pure sun power. The sun goldfinch might need that." At that moment, another owl swooped in, livelier than the last. A bright, cylindrical paper box was tied to its leg, plastered with the Weasley's Wizard Wheezes logo. Jiang untied and opened it. Inside was a handful of gaudily wrapped sweets and a hastily scrawled note that practically danced off the page. "To the Hufflepuff Witch Gardener. These are preliminary taste test samples. We've tried them and the effects are very interesting. The formal proposal and galleon pouch are on their way." G.F. Jiang picked up one of the candies. The wrapper was a gleaming sunflower yellow with a grinning sunflower on it. She hesitated a beat, then offered one to Ernie. He looked torn between glee and alarm, then Hufflepuff curiosity won. He unwrapped a toffee-looking sweet and popped it into his mouth. A few minutes later, Ernie Macmillan, proud scion of a pure-blood family, was inexplicably serenading several dozing devil's snare plants in Greenhouse 3. He sang an oddly emotional, wildly off-key song of growth, praising the plants with more fervor than any school song required. Jiang blinked, then reached for her notebook. Effect: significant target, human manifestation, compulsory plant praise singing. Duration: to be observed. She smiled despite herself. Her collaboration with the Weasleys had turned out to be broader than she'd expected. She glanced from Ernie's impassioned performance to the faintly glowing sun goldfinch mix and thought, with a small, private amusement, that school life was hardly calmer than dealing with the Dark Lord, only far more interesting.